everyone. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth on Internet of Things, and as I've been sort of studying this landscape and give a range of presentations on this for both industry trade shows and industry events and things like that, what it falls under is, I think, this very, very interesting theme that I call connecting the unconnected. There's two bits of that. The first is the connecting of people who've never been connected to the internet before via a smartphone, places like China and India, people who are coming online for the first time. But it's also the connecting of unconnected things. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But if you follow this, and even if you've gone to CES, where I think it's fascinating to go and look at, see how big the Internet of Things pavilion gets every year. At CES, you see all sorts of new things, whether that's connected beds, connected basketballs, connected sports equipment, connected garments. The list goes on. But because we're connecting so many of these things, it has both a big opportunity but a lot of challenges. And so we want to spend some time talking about both of those things. So what I wanted to do is just sort of start off with the big picture. You know, why is this interesting? Why, when we talk about Internet of Things and platforms, why is this good for the industry, for humanity, companies, etc.? So, Maverick, why don't you start?
Okay. First of all, maybe I would need to explain what is BYOC for. BYOC stands for Build Your Own Cloud. We are in the consumer space. Acer is doing all the hardware device for the consumer, like PC, notebook, tablet, those things. We do see the trend of connectivity is everything get connected is in the future, and they will require a platform to be able to connect all of them together. So that's why we are providing a BYOC, we call it Build Your Own Cloud platform to all the hardwares. This is the biggest challenge we see for this is the hardware business traditionally is everything costs and everything happen at the beginning, before the sales happen. But when you talk about cloud, everything is happen after your product get installed, get shipped. So this need to be connected. To break through that problem, then that will create huge opportunities. And we do see people will have a lot of more, because of all the technologies, a lot of sensors, a lot of artificial intelligence, that's the interesting thing people will start to invent and change their life. So that's what we are seeing from a consumer perspective. Yeah.
So as we look at what we call the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything or the industrial Internet, we look across, and there are different aspects to this. So it's not monolithic. There is the industrial side of things and the consumer side. There are the big things and there are the little things that get connected or need to be connected. They're the things that are kind of temporal and the things that last forever. All of them have different requirements, but fundamentally it's just about, do we create greater value or through additional functionality, or do we create value by reducing cost or increasing reliability or resiliency through these things, being able to predict what is going to happen through the information we're getting back from instrumented devices. So when we look at it, it kind of plays from those two sides, and that's what the real promise is.
One of the things that I think is interesting, and if you've experienced whether it's a Nest thermostat or programmable lights or any of the things, is how when you use these platforms, they're often fairly novel to begin with. I can check my thermostat. I can do something interesting. There's all sorts of things. In fact, I'm not sure if you guys know this, but one of the most popular, I guess, internet or digital home sales items from retail like Lowe's and Best Buy are connected door locks, and which sort of makes sense. The door lock is something you sort of interact with every day, and so the idea that you can walk up to it and unlock it with your phone, or if somebody's locked out, if your kids are locked out of their house, you can remotely unlock that door. There's some sort of intrinsic value there. They're pretty expensive. Obviously, those costs will come down. But what I think is interesting when you try these things is that they're all very isolated. So while we talk about this grand vision for the Internet of Things, I sort of like to call them, it's the Internet of isolated things. Each one is basically a walled garden into itself. There's no interoperability. And that's to some degree where we hope platforms shake themselves out, whether that's a standards-based platform. But I think that given where we're at today and sort of the inevitable 10 to 15-year future that will march down, I think that has some fundamental challenges about how these things work together, who's got business models that might want to keep them from working together. And I see this tension rising right now that's not going to get resolved in the short term, but I think that's one of the bigger challenges, and I don't know what you guys think.
Well, when you look at lots of different things that start off very disaggregated and with very little interoperability, such as the payment systems in the US, like Bank Americard and and MasterCard or MasterCharge, eventually, when they started off, they were completely separate with Diners Club, et cetera. And then they eventually came to this duopoly agreement. And then now they have all sorts. ATMs start off separate, and then they saw the need to interoperate. I think Internet of Things is, from a platform perspective, because it is a classic platform play, will start out that way. There will be independent or unique platforms for sort of the large kind of things that can handle and support a proprietary platform, and then there's going to be the others that need to interoperate in order to make the use cases work.
I don't know if you...
Well, that would be, from consumer perspective, there are big cloud operators like Google. They are hosting. Hopefully everybody will get on board. Of course, there will be risk of people start to have people concerned about Google know you even more than you do. Mm-hmm. There are also like device makers like Apple. They are also hosting, leveraging their hardware platform deployment to hosting all this and to make those data interoperability through their cloud operating. And there will be small isolated ecosystem, like something like we do see there's some small one like surrounding the pedometer, the health, the part start to evolve bigger and bigger. And to your point, I would say that will evolve. In some point, when they are big enough, they will be able to interoperate it and even expanding, create more opportunities, and people will want to join them.
One of the things, and I spend a lot of time with either big companies or other analyst firms that use the big numbers. We'll have 25 billion connected things or 50 billion connected things, or then 75. That number sort of keeps going up, which I think is entertaining. But part of that, when you look at the cost curve for embedded connectivity, and whether the device connects to the internet or whether it's a device that's machine to machine, meaning it just connects to another device in the network, the scale of these things, I think, is actually quite fascinating. Like I said, you use the sort of CES example, and you see things that get connected to the internet, thermometers, ovens, turkey basters. I mean, you name it, right? There's things that get connected, and every year these things just keep on growing. You've got connected light posts now with dozens of sensors in trial in different cities, and sometimes I wonder, what pressure. Platforms aside, what pressure does that put on infrastructure, right onto the grid to scale these things up and connect them? I know you guys do a lot of back-end infrastructure, and that to me I think is a blossoming challenge as well.
Well, there is an enormous challenge relative to the capacity of the networks to handle the number of things. And as you talked about, well, we can't quite keep track of them, and it's partially because of definition. Is a sensor a thing, or is it something that you can control a thing? At what point does it become a thing on the Internet of Things? Yeah. So that is a different argument. But when you get to it, there's a capacity issue relative to just the pure number of things, and then there's the throughput, because they're going to create a lot of data. There are applications or use cases that tremendous amounts of data, and then there's the latency issues on certain types of use cases or certain applications that present tremendous challenges to the carrier or the networks that as they exist today. And as we look at sort of LTE really doesn't solve it. The Wi-Fi networks in conjunction with other different types of things like Zigbee or whatever interface you're going for don't really solve it, because then you get into a lot of kind of kludging together networks. So that's when we start to hear about 5G networks. That's really where 5G networks will play out, whether or not we ever get to something called 5G, but somebody's going to, or the players are going to have to work on the architecture of networks so that they can have a more elegant design instead of constantly bolting on more and more things to operate these networks. Right. So, and clearly spectrum is an issue. where they need to increase the available spectrum to handle the number of things.
One of the things maybe you, Maverick, want to talk about from the hardware side is security. I think one of the things that constantly comes up in this conversation, and you have to keep in mind we're in the very, very early stages of this Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything transition. But security is, a big deal. I mean, we talked about it a little bit with health and wearables, which I think falls into this category, and that there might be certain things I want my doctor to see that I don't want my insurance agent to see, right? And so how do you sort of keep that divide? How do you keep someone from hacking my door lock, right, as an example, or from any other number of things? So the consumer platform and the security elements that wrap into that, whether that's local hardware or software and services, plays a role, but I know you guys are looking at investing in things like hardware and software for that as well.
Well, in terms of security, it's always the number one priority. If you want to bring your stuff into the cloud, one of the examples you mentioned about if someone else can unlock your door because some security breach. From security, there are multiple aspects. Of course, definitely the system itself, the data communication need to be encrypted to make sure that is secure because everything is going through the internet. So you don't want to have someone to steal that. That's one aspect that's definitely every time we have to improve. And this, I would say there will be always no absolute security because it's all kinds of lock or all kinds of security can be break. It's just a matter of how much money you are going to put in to break that security. But on the other side, there's a dynamic security, which we do see a lot of internet hacking incidents. There was some hacking about U.S. Post Office, the Social Security got stolen and those things. That's what I may refer more on a dynamic side. There's a lot of internet hackers trying to hack into the system. And how do you really prevent that? You have to have a live guard, really just like security guard, looking after that. That's also another challenge. And of course, Taiwan, where we are based, is one of the most being hacked country, U.S. and Taiwan, because we also get hacked a lot. So how to leverage that experience? It's just like in virus, you have to make yourself stronger and stronger. That would be the key.
So if we think about it from a trust perspective, the assumption going forward is there is no more trust. It's kind of trust in the internet is sort of over. So we have to look at it in different ways. So one way is to just constantly go after security. Yeah. And then it's just a race between the hackers and the preventers. But when we think about it is from a society perspective, there's the dynamic of you can be secure, you can be private. Which one do you want? But the challenge is, I mean, they're almost diametrically opposed. So that's a societal thing. As an individual, you can kind of play around with that a little bit. But as you look at it, it's like, how do we get to a consensus, a distributed consensus model, as opposed to a centralized kind of arbitrary or kind of single point of authentication. So there's all different ways to look at it. But it's always good to listen to the previous speaker as he was talking about the blockchain. Blockchain is an approach. There are all sorts of challenges with blockchain, but what it does is it says, there is no trust, so we're going to distribute the consensus on a transaction. We're going to verify or authenticate who the two players are. Do they have the rights to do what they say they're going to do?
Yeah.
And the problem there is how do you scale to trillions of things?
Right. Yeah, I think one of the interesting dynamics, obviously at play from a security standpoint, is what happens on kind of your local, most personal device, like your smartphone, right? One of the things that we sort of include in our big analysis is this shift where mobile identity or digital identity is one of the major trends going forward, whereas more of your digital assets, whether that be credit cards for payments or doctors or health records, your passport, your license, all of these things go digital. You're sort of creating this broader digital identity that you're actually using one central device largely as a validator, right? Your smartphone, and so the role that it plays, right, with other devices, that you are who you say you are where you say you are to unlock a door or share digital data, things like that.
So if you think about the most effective authentication scheme that we have is what the mobile operators do to authenticate and authorize that your device is who your device says it is. So the SIM
Yeah.
is basically it. And the massive distributed network relative to how they go about doing that. So, AAA or, home located records or whatever whatever the system evolves to is one model, but there's still a central player involved that can be hacked.
Yeah.
So how do you distribute that even further gets to be a question so that nobody can actually be hacked. You'd have to be an irrational, very large player to actually do it, and there aren't that many of them.
Yeah, and I think when you look at how it's being solved today, it's very simply, right? I mean, I think, Apple with what they're doing with Touch ID, and that can be leveraged in the future for me to authenticate whether work or industrial Internet of Things or payments, right? But it's very simple. It's a thumbprint.
What happens when your biometric gets hacked? You can't change that.
Right.
You can change other things, but you can't change your iris, your thumbprint,
Right.
your whatever.
Right. Well, and I think even in enterprise or even in, kind of the broader discussions that we can have about what Internet of Things works for or looks like in the workplace, you sort of have that similar issue, which is how do you do dual authentication? What things, so they've said, right, maybe wearables or other embedded technology validates you are who you are based on other biometrics, right, things like that.
From the consumer side, there's another challenge, of course. We want to make sure the maximum security to protect our customer, but on the other side, we need to make sure also the usability, user-friendly is very important.
Yeah. So as we're talking about all the challenge and we're focusing on, what is going to prevent us, well, I think that we will overcome these things because the upside is so great, but it is a platform model because as we look at the use cases, except for, jet engines or, combines in a wheat field, they are small, the use cases. So you need a platform model. And going back to the telcos, the carriers have always operated as a service provider. They have service control points. They have distributed platforms around the networks. They have things that manage. They can turn on, turn off, monitor the state of network equipment, of network nodes, of the various different things that are required in the network. As we look at it, it's a model for going forward. I'm not saying that we should just adopt it straight up, but when we think about the fact that we are looking at data, interpreting it, and then acting on it, that's all an OSS is. It's just codified. So as we go forward, it's really looking at what's the next generation of policy that says to the question I think you asked is like, if I give my doctor data, how do I know what I've given the doctor the permission to do with my data? Can we get to the point of having self-defensible data, which is a kind of more of a sci-fi thought, I think. But right. If you get to it so that the data knows what is allowed to be done to it.
Smart data.
Yeah, smart data. There you go.
So what about business models? I think you look at almost every example that's falls into this sort of IoT novelty, and they're expensive, right? They're more expensive than their counterparts, right? A connected thermostat costs more than a non-connected thermostat. A connected basketball costs more than a regular basketball. But right now, that's for the few, right? And one of my sort of central convictions is, over time, the cost to just embed connectivity will continue to decline. I mean, this might be 5 years, 10 years. So that inevitably, those things that can connect and should connect will connect for various reasons.
Yeah, operatively there, the word should connect.
Right.
Not just because you can connect something doesn't mean you should.
Well, a good example is like, I think the Sleep Number bed is fascinating because it makes two points. The first one, that all of a sudden a company who was not a tech company is now a tech company. And that idea, I think, is very interesting, right? You could look at, again, people who are making shoes, people who are making connected tennis rackets or golf, just examples of sports that I'm interested in. But you find those, and you look at them and you go, these were not tech companies. I mean, they might have done R&D, but they weren't embedding microchips and becoming a software company. And now you have, Sleep Number embedding sensors in their bed, which will track your sleep, track your heat, track your heart rate, see how you sleep, versus compared to your partners, and give you all of that data.
So the answer there is will it cause you to have a better night's sleep?
Right.
But does a connected toaster give you a better piece of toast?
Exactly, right. What's the point, right?
Yeah, what
or
is
a coffee pot, right?
And
there could be, but that's sort of up to the vendor to come up with the value proposition.
Well, for the most part, business models are broke. There aren't ones. One, they're not sustainable. And as we embed these things, particularly on the industrial side, these things are going to last for decades. Even in the home, if you embed and kind of drive into the home, it's decades. Cars last 10, 12 at a minimum. Most cars are out there for 10 or 12 years. how do you do that? And your point is you can charge more for it. I think that's not the way it's going to play. It's like it will become the norm. A connected car. Actually, I think ultimately a connected car is a misnomer. It's an autonomous car because of the issue of trust. It's like you're not going to allow a external party to control your car.
Right.
Your car can, you might allow your car to control it, but you're not going to allow an external party to control it. The risks would be too high. But as we look at the business models, one business model is the Nest business model, which is great for Google. But not everybody is Google. And that model works when you have a dominant market position, which they hold. Facebook could come up with something, they have a dominant position that they can turn around and monetize it on the other side. But the Nest owner in their home is not Google's customer.
Right.
It's who they sell that data to is Google's customer.
Right.
So that business model may work for Google, but it's not going to work for everybody.
Sure.
Or it'll work for very few.
Sure. Well, and that's why I think, again, if you look at the cost curve of embedded, right, and we're super early in this, but sensors, right, the microprocessors, all those things just inevitably come down to the point where, an example that I use regularly is this connected tennis racket from Babolat. If you were at Samsung's developers conference, they were there, but they'll be at CES. But basically, it's Babolat makes tennis rackets. They sell, they make 2 of the most popular tennis rackets on the circuit, but it has a microchip in it with some software, and it does full data analysis of your tennis game. And what's interesting about that is, again, it's $200 more than its same product without the microchip. But inevitably, over time, you could see how that comes to every tennis racket that's sold at the same cost.
Well, or maybe it makes you a better tennis player. It's not a better tennis racket. It makes you a better tennis player. So therefore, it's worth it to somebody that's interested in that.
Right.
You could see a golf club. Your swing's wrong, right?
Right.
That's why you slice the ball is because you swing. Your swing is off, and you can fix it in this way. So there are things that you could say, well, it actually makes something better, but then the market for that is a lot less than the market for golf clubs or tennis rackets in general.
Right.
It's just for the people that, and for the time they want to actually learn what they're doing.
Sure. Well, and I think, again, it makes the point that companies who, who are not tech companies before, now all of a sudden getting into tech changes this dynamic in many different ways.
I'd say everyone's becoming a service provider, and this is part of being a service provider.
Exactly. Sleep Number wants to be a service provider, providing you with better sleep here.
They provide you with hours of sleep.
Right.
They just need to have some vehicle to provide that service to you.
That'd be an interesting model. Will they, if you sleep less, will you pay less?
Yeah, exactly. And when you think platform-wise on this, there's sort of ways to think of this, right? I think there's at least some people who are in sort of the default camp that embedded Google plays a role there, right? Because being a service provider, hardware can be commoditized. It fits their business model, but not everybody's going in that direction, right? I think the business model dynamics of this are fascinating because there are companies whose business model is not to commoditize hardware, and so for them, they'll either search for those value propositions or carve out those niches, like we talked about.
So just the construct of what do we mean by platform? And a platform is of value if it delivers services that are of value. So when you think about a platform, all a platform is the pieces that are kind of common across a number of different services. So if you think about it as how do I know that this thing is valid or not? Well, we might get to a standard on that we can actually authenticate the thing, much like a SIM card. We can authenticate the damn thing. We can't authenticate the user, but we can authenticate the thing. And then we kind of go from there. Okay, so that'll be a piece of the platform. And then we can go on to the next piece. It's like when we look at how we collect the data or how the connections occur back, as you were talking about, the error interfaces, if we can rationalize those into a platform, that can be very helpful too.
Yeah. And I think, when you look at least the adoption cycles of these, right, the platforms being somewhat fragmented or controlled, again, either on the consumer side, whether that's iOS or Android, which are, the 2 dominant in mobile for controlling these things, or on the back end, right, whether people embed either Android or Linux or those types of things into it. It works in this sort of fragmented world that we're in today just to get adoption, right, to get people used to the idea of connecting their thermostats or their tennis rackets. But over time, I think those who have different business models than hardware, right? Like Babolet's is to sell rackets, not necessarily sell technology. There's services they can layer onto that, or Sleep Number, or even car companies, right? Connecting their cars. Those are companies with a business model they're already good at, using tech to extend and embrace new audiences, cater to new audiences, et cetera.
The business model of selling tennis rackets, if it really comes to, will make you a better tennis player, or will get you a better night's sleep so you will sleep more, it breaks the old model, because now you can't sell a bed anymore. You have to sell sleep.
Right.
And it gets to be a real problem when you look at it from.
Well, and I think everybody, whether that's consumer or industrial internet, that's going to come to the same conclusion.
The combines, it's like, your yield is better. That's what they're selling.
Exactly.
Your yield on your crops is better.
Which either opens the door to new players, right, who are embracing of either disruptive or a new business model or product category, or those incumbents have to reinvent themselves with those
They don't make combines. They buy them and give them to farmers who give them the data, and they kind of play from that perspective. So they can kind of cycle it back through. But what they're basically doing is we're able to provide you with a greater yield, and we take some of that yield back.
Yeah. So when we talk IoT, maybe just sort of share what one or two of the most interesting things you see happening in Internet of Things, either those examples or use cases, something like that, just to sort of say, I think, whether sustainable or not, this is really interesting.
Well, definitely the thing you mentioned about Nest is one of the interesting things we see from outside of the United States. In every home need at least a thermostat to control the temperature inside the home, and that's the Trojan horse you put inside the home and start to collect the big data, and those big data which we see there's a value, but how to monetize that's later on. But if you cannot you don't start to collect them, and later on you will not have those data and monetize them later. That's one of the things people are thinking about. How can we bring in something into for example, for the smart home environment, bring into that environment and start to be part of your life, and you cannot live without it.
So I think that the most interesting, first off, is things aren't necessarily inanimate. I mean, people are part of this world as well. Right. So I think that when we look at when the focus is on who the customers are, on the value, and I think personal area networks are, kind of attacking it from a health perspective, could make us a whole lot healthier as a society and reduce dramatically the costs of chronic care, is a real promise. It's a real challenge, because I think people in general don't really think about being healthy, and that's part of the problem, certainly in the U.S., where it isn't at the top of mind. People don't call their doctors. They're not actively managing their health. If the Internet of Things or these connected devices, the Fitbits and on, can cause us to think more and actually be able to monitor and then change our behaviors, that could be a huge benefit. And it's really, it's sort of at the forefront now. We're seeing a lot of it starting to play out.
Well, I think that's the premise of what you said, which is what's the point of all that data, right? Is the data being used in an interesting telling me how many steps I have is not that useful, right? But giving me recommendations.
And using that to sell me more stuff is not that interesting.
Right.
If it changes my behavior so that I'm healthier, that's very, very interesting. If it's the hospital can track things and understand what's going on relative to you if you give them access to that, so that they can increase the quality of the outcomes. They can reduce the cost. They can increase the experience or improve the experience of the patient. All those things are really positive and are very possible, and it's just a question of making people aware and willing to be open to changing behavior.
Right. So last question. We talk a lot about all these crazy sorts of connected things, whether it's sports gears or bed or refrigerators. Toilets is another great example, right? But that's not going to be pervasive anytime soon. If you were to bet on what category would be the most widely adopted as a starting point of Internet of Things, whether it's health or whether it's something else, what do you think would be kind of that first?
Video surveillance.
Video surveillance. So okay.
I mean,
which is
it's already pretty. If you look at Times Square, you look at the city in London, it's pretty pervasive. More and more you see, whatever happened, you see a video of it. but there's a lot more potential out there for it, and you'll see that there are challenges relative to privacy on that, but again, it's the privacy versus security argument, but I think security will win.
So you think that'll be the first sort of widely adopted IoT category?
You're going to see them with drones and all that fun stuff.
From our side, we are looking into wearables, like pedometer is one. Of course, that will be data connect to how to manage your health. Wearable is one of a very interesting area, and take time. People will build up that behavior. There's still a lot of people buying wearable. Pedometer, use it for 2 weeks and put it aside. Once that build up, and there will be more and more usage model, more and more interesting data, and then more business behind it.
Yeah, so my last point is that the less we think about the inputs and more we think about the output or the value, the better. The Fitbit isn't it. It's what Fitbit allows you to change. So the pieces, and that's what a lot of people get caught up on, the pieces, the sensors, the connected device, the network, the this, the that. It's not about that, it's about the output. Because if you look at the inputs, you'll never get there.
Right. Yeah, I think, if I was to make a bet, it would be somewhere in the health and wearable category, whether that's doctors prescribing those. There's this line of thinking I've been thinking about, this idea of a prescription wearable, that things the doctors will give, right, as a part of that process.
There's a company that I've heard of out of Europe that has the swallowable cameras for colonoscopies.
Eatables.
Because it overcomes one of the fears that people have. So it can do a tremendous amount of good.
Right. Good. Right. Well, thanks. That's all the time we've got. If you guys want